Hello and welcome to the third lesson in our series of lessons on phrases. If you haven't gone through the first two, there are links in the description. Make sure to check those two out before you come here to continue. In today's lesson, we are looking at the functions that noun phrases play in sentences. Hit the like button if you find this helpful, subscribe, and do not forget to share with your friends. By now, we should already know that phrases are groups of related words which have no finite verb and perform a particular function. Function simply implies a role. So the role that noun phrases play in sentences is what we consider as their functions. And quite simply, the functions of noun phrases are the same as the functions of a noun. Do you know the functions of a noun? If you do, then you already know how phrases also function in sentences. As we may recall, the functions of nouns in sentences and as taught in our junior high school days are subject, object which can be direct or indirect, complement, object of a preposition, and then apposition. These are the same as the functions of phrases. Clearly, noun phrases function in the same way as nouns. We are going to take a look at each of the functions and see some examples that will help us to understand them better. When a noun phrase functions as a subject of a verb or a verb phrase, then the noun phrase begins the sentence. The noun phrase is the performer of the action of the verb. The noun phrase is said to be that thing which something is said about in a sentence. And again, the noun phrase is immediately followed by the verb or the verb phrase. These are four indications to tell us when a noun phrase is functioning as a subject of a verb in a sentence. Now on to some examples. In our first example, we have all the girls came late to school. Our noun phrase in focus is all the girls. Remember the four indications we gave? According to the four indications already given, we can say that all the girls, our noun phrase, is the subject of this sentence because first, it begins the sentence. It is the performer of the action of the verb came. Again, we can see that this phrase is that thing in the sentence which something is said about. And lastly, we can also see that the verb in the sentence immediately follows this noun phrase. For that, we can confidently say that all the girls is the subject of the verb came. We have our second example, pressure in the school makes learning difficult. Our noun phrase in focus is pressure in the school. In this example as well, we can say that pressure in the school is the subject of the sentence. Why? Because it begins the sentence. It is the performer of the action of the verb that is making learning difficult. We can say it is that thing in the sentence about which something is said. And then as we can clearly see, the verb phrase makes learning immediately follows this noun phrase. So there is no doubt then to say that pressure in the school is the subject of the verb phrase makes learning. Our third example, those giant mountains protect the village. Just as in the previous two, this noun phrase, those giant mountains, begins this sentence. Those giant mountains is the performer of the action, which is protecting the village. We can say it is that thing in the sentence about which something is said. And lastly, and quite clearly too, we can see that the verb protect comes immediately after this noun phrase. We can conclude therefore that those giant mountains, our noun phrase in focus, is simply the subject of the verb protect. Lastly, we have a good book to read. Just as in the previous three, the noun phrase a good book to read begins this sentence. It is the performer of the action of the verb that is would be. It is that thing in the sentence about which something is said. And the verb phrase would be immediately follows this noun phrase, we are confidently able to conclude that a good book to read, our noun phrase, is the subject of the verb would be. Anytime a noun phrase functions as a subject, it is the subject of the verb in the sentence. We write subject of the verb, we quote the verb, and we put the verb in inverted commas. So for instance, the first example we have, all the girls, is the subject of the verb came. Anytime you are writing down your answer, be sure to write it in this way. The next in our functions of the noun phrases. Noun phrase as object of a verb or verb phrase. If a noun phrase is the object of a verb or a verb phrase, that particular noun phrase is the receiver of the action of the verb or the verb phrase. That noun phrase may be a direct or indirect object. As a direct object, the noun phrase answers the question who or what. And as an indirect object, the noun phrase answers the question to whom or for whom. Again, some examples to clarify these. The villagers beat the innocent man. The noun phrase for our consideration in this sentence is the innocent man. The action of the sentence is beat. The innocent man suffers or receives this action of beat. We can conclude, therefore, that the innocent man is the object of the verb beat. But is it an indirect object or a direct object? We can simply test for that by asking who in relation to the sentence. For instance, the villagers beat who? And our answer will be the innocent man. Since the innocent man answers the question who in this case, we can clearly and simply conclude the noun phrase the innocent man is the direct object of the verb beat. The minister donated some cash at the function. Our noun phrase in focus is some cash. The action in the sentence is donated. Clearly, the action affects some cash. Some cash is the object of this verb donated. But is it direct or indirect? How do we test for direct objects? By asking who or what in relation to the sentence. So we can still ask, the minister donated what? Our answer would simply be some cash. Since some cash answers this question, we can confidently say it is the direct object of the verb donated. Henry gave the bag to the young black boy. Our noun phrase in focus is the young black boy. The action in the sentence is gave. But we clearly see that Henry's action of giving the bag affects two things in the sentence. It affects the bag and then the young black boy. So we can say that the young black boy is an object in the sentence. But is it a direct object or an indirect object? How do we test for an indirect object? It is by simply asking the question to whom or for whom. So in this case, we can ask Henry gave the bag to whom? And our answer would be the young black boy. For that matter, the young black boy functions as an indirect object of the verb gave in this sentence. Again, in writing down your answers, do not forget, you do not say it is the object of the sentence, but rather it is the object of the verb, and then you quote the particular verb in the sentence. We move on to the next. Noun phrase functioning as a complement of a verb or a verb phrase. Whenever we say that a noun phrase functions as a complement of a verb or a verb phrase, what we mean is simply that the noun phrase immediately follows a linking verb. Examples of linking verbs are is, are, am, was, were. Actually, all the forms of the to be verb. Besides that, we can have verbs such as became, seem, appear, look, feel, smell, grow, taste as other examples of linking verbs. Not only does a complement come after a linking verb, but whenever a complement comes after a linking verb, it does one thing. That is, it re-identifies or renames the subject of the sentence. In other words, anytime a noun phrase comes after a linking verb, it goes back to re-identify or to give more information about the subject of the sentence. More examples to clarify this point. The two men are the expected guests. Our noun phrase in focus is the expected guests. The noun phrase simply comes after a linking verb, in this case the verb are. Besides, we can see that this verb goes back to refer to the two men. In other words, it re-identifies the two men. Who are the expected guests? It is the two men. Simply, we can conclude therefore that the expected guests functions as a complement of the verb are. I am the current prefect of the school. Our noun phrase in consideration is the current prefect of the school. What verb is this noun phrase coming after? It is the verb am. What type of verb is the verb am? It is a linking verb. By that alone, we should be able to conclude that that noun phrase, the current prefect of the school, is simply functioning as a complement of the verb am. But even if that is difficult, we can as well see that the current prefect of the school goes back to re-identify I, which is the subject of the sentence. By so doing, its function is simply the complement of the verb am. Lastly, the problem was the most difficult one. The most difficult one being the noun phrase in consideration follows after which verb? It is a linking verb was. Besides, it goes back to re-identify the problem. The function therefore is simply a complement of the verb was. Again, notice how I say the functions. They are not complements of the sentence, neither are they complements of the subject, but they are complements of the verb. Our next function of a noun phrase is simply that a noun phrase can also function as an object of a preposition. In this case, we are saying that the noun phrase simply comes after a preposition. Examples of prepositions are for, at, in, about, by, and others. Can you write down some examples of prepositions? Do try. Let's look at these examples. The thieves were seen around the high school campus. Our noun phrase in focus, the high school campus. I could ask you the function of this noun phrase and I would expect you to get it right. Why? Because it simply comes after a preposition. If that is the case, then the function of this noun phrase, the high school campus, is simply object of the preposition around. Same thing happens in the rest of our examples. For instance, Mr. Andrew has been speaking a lot about the recent uprising. The recent uprising is our noun phrase. Clearly, we see it coming after the preposition about. Its function would therefore be object of the preposition about. It is the same thing we will do to the last two, the general function being the noun phrase in our third example, coming after the preposition at, and the train station being the fourth of our noun phrase coming after the preposition by. These are functioning as objects of the preposition at and by, respectively. And lastly, a noun phrase functions as an apposition. As an apposition, we are saying that the noun phrase expands the noun or pronoun already mentioned as a subject. In other words, the apposition exists to add more meaning or more information to the subject of a sentence. For instance, Kwame, the elder brother of the chief, arrived from the States. Our noun phrase in focus is the elder brother of the chief. Because the elder brother of the chief expands on the subject Kwame, that noun phrase, the elder brother of the chief, functions as an apposition to the noun Kwame. Again, we have Atonsu, the newly created town, is notorious for eventful market days. Our noun phrase in focus is the newly created town. Does this expand or add meaning to anything in the sentence? Clearly it does, to the subject Atonsu. We can say that the newly created town, which is our noun phrase in focus, functions as an apposition to the noun Atonsu. And lastly, football, the most beautiful game of sports, is not played in America. Our subject of the sentence is what? Football. Does anything expand on football in the sentence? Clearly, it is the most beautiful game of sports. For that matter, we are saying that the most beautiful game of sports is an apposition to the noun football. Again, mind you, these are not complements. Why? Because they do not come after linking verbs. Even though they are expanding on the subjects, they do not come after linking verbs. For that matter, we do not consider them as complements. We rather call them apposition. Well, this brings us to the end of yet another lesson in this series. Do not forget, you can always look out for noun phrases in the texts that you read. Try to spot noun phrases. Try to see the functions that they are playing and try to write them down. These are ways that you can help yourself to learn better. You can recall from our first lesson that another type of phrase which needs our attention is the adjectival phrase. It is very necessary that we take a look at that also, of course, in the next lesson. So do make sure to click on the next video where we consider the adjectival phrase.